"Daddy, she has your eyes." A little girl's innocent words expose a homeless stranger who somehow knows every secret a single dad has tried to bury, and what happens next will shake his whole world. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. A gentle breeze rustled through the autumn leaves as James Carter walked hand in hand with his daughter Lila toward Henderson Park. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the air held that perfect crispness that made sweaters cozy but not too heavy. "Did you finish all your breakfast, baby girl?" James asked, adjusting the purple backpack strap on Lila's shoulder. Lila skipped alongside him, her braids bouncing with each step. "Yes, Daddy, even the crusty parts of the toast." She wrinkled her nose. "But next time, can you not make it so brown?" James chuckled, his deep laugh warming the morning air. "You mean burnt? I'll try to pay more attention next time instead of checking your homework while making breakfast." "It's okay, Daddy." Lila squeezed his hand. "I put extra jelly on it. That helped." They passed the old oak tree that marked the entrance to Henderson Park, its branches spreading wide like welcoming arms. The morning dew still clung to the grass, making it sparkle in the sunlight. James checked his watch. They had 20 minutes before they needed to head to school. "Can we go on the swings?" Lila asked, her brown eyes bright with hope. "Just for a little bit," James replied. "We don't want to be late for—" But Lila had already let go of his hand, her attention caught by something, or someone, else. James watched as his daughter darted toward a wooden bench near the playground. "Lila, wait!" he called out, quickening his pace to catch up. On the bench sat a woman James had never seen before. Her clothes were worn but clean, and she held a sketchbook in her lap. Her shoulders were hunched as if carrying an invisible weight, but there was something gentle about the way she held her pencil, making careful strokes across the paper. Lila stood in front of the woman, studying her face with that direct, unfiltered curiosity that only children possess. The woman looked up, startled by the sudden appearance of the little girl, and their eyes met. That's when Lila said it, words that made James's heart skip a beat. "Daddy, she has your eyes." James reached for Lila's shoulder, ready to pull her back and apologize for the interruption, when he noticed the sketchbook in the woman's lap, his words caught in his throat. There, on the cream-colored paper, were drawings, detailed, careful drawings that made his skin prickle with unease. He saw Lila on her favorite swing, her head thrown back in laughter. Another sketch showed James himself, bent over his carpenter's workbench, concentrating on something in his hands. The details were perfect: the scar on his left thumb from an old work accident, the way his forehead creased when he focused. The woman, Sarah, as they would later learn, didn't move. She sat very still, like a deer sensing danger, her fingers lightly resting on the edge of her sketchbook. Her eyes, which did hold an uncanny similarity to James's own deep brown ones, darted between father and daughter. James felt his protective instincts surge. He pulled Lila closer to his side, his carpenter's hands gentle but firm on her shoulders. His mind raced with questions. How long had this woman been watching them? Why did she have these drawings? What did she want? The morning suddenly felt colder, and the friendly park seemed to transform into something more ominous. The peaceful scene from moments ago, the dew-kissed grass, the gentle breeze, the promise of a normal day, shifted into something unsettling. Lila, oblivious to her father's tension, reached out toward the sketchbook. "Those are really pretty. That's me on the swings, Daddy. Look." James tightened his grip slightly on Lila's shoulder, keeping her from moving closer. He studied the woman more carefully now. Her clothes were weathered but clean, a faded blue sweater, worn jeans, and sensible shoes that had seen better days. Her dark hair was neat but unstyled, pulled back from her face in a simple ponytail. She didn't look threatening, but James had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she held the sketchbook, but she didn't try to hide it or close it. Instead, she kept it open, as if offering an explanation without words. The morning light caught the details of another drawing, this one showing Lila at her school's recent fall festival, wearing the butterfly face paint she had been so proud of. James felt his chest tighten. That festival had been just last week, which meant these drawings weren't old. They were recent. This stranger had been watching them, following them, capturing moments of their private life on paper. The peaceful morning had vanished entirely now, replaced by a heavy silence broken only by the distant sound of birds and the subtle rustle of leaves in the breeze. James stood frozen, caught between his instinct to grab Lila and run, and his need to understand what was happening. Lila, still fixed on the drawings, pointed to another page. "Look, Daddy, she drew you fixing Mrs. Johnson's porch. You were wearing your favorite blue shirt." Indeed, there it was. Another intimately detailed moment of their lives, captured in careful pencil strokes. James remembered that day clearly. It had been just 3 days ago. He had spent the afternoon repairing their elderly neighbor's porch steps, while Lila had played with her dolls in the front yard. The woman, Sarah, hadn't moved or spoken. She sat still, her eyes downcast now, her fingers still resting lightly on the edge of her sketchbook. There was something in her posture that spoke of both resignation and anticipation, as if she had been waiting for this moment but wasn't quite ready for it now that it had arrived. James swallowed hard, his throat feeling dry. The morning that had started so normally had twisted into something he couldn't quite understand. His daughter's innocent observation, "She has your eyes," echoed in his mind, adding another layer of unease to the situation. He found himself studying Sarah's face more carefully now, looking for any sign of recognition, any hint of why she had been documenting their lives in such detail. The similarity in their eyes was undeniable, but it had to be coincidence, didn't it? The world seemed to hold its breath as they stood there. The protective father, the curious child, and the mysterious woman with her book of secrets drawn in pencil. The autumn morning continued around them, but in that moment, time seemed to stand still at Henderson Park. James stared at the sketchbook in Sarah's trembling hands, his heart pounding against his ribs. Page after page showed intimate moments of their daily life. Lila riding her bike with training wheels, James working in his carpentry shop, the two of them sharing ice cream on their front porch. The details were perfect, down to the small scar above Lila's left eyebrow from when she fell off the swing last summer. "Who are you?" James demanded, his voice low but firm. He kept Lila close to his side, his protective instinct in full force. "Why do you have these drawings of us?" Sarah's thin fingers traced the edge of her sketchbook. Despite her worn clothes and weathered appearance, her eyes held a steady, gentle intelligence. "Marie asked me to watch over you both," she said softly. Before she passed, the mention of his wife's name hit James like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Marie never mentioned she worried about you, James," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "She knew how hard it would be for you to raise Lila alone. She made me promise to keep an eye on you both." Lila tugged at James's sleeve. "Daddy, look at how pretty she drew my butterfly hair clips. They're just like the ones Mommy gave me." James felt dizzy. The butterfly clips had been Marie's last gift to Lila, something he'd never mentioned to anyone outside the family. The fact that this stranger knew about them sent a chill down his spine. "Ma'am, I don't know what kind of game you're playing," James said, struggling to keep his voice steady, "but I need you to stay away from us. Come on, Lila." "But Daddy..." "Now, baby girl." He grabbed Lila's hand, perhaps a bit too firmly, and began leading her away from the bench. Sarah didn't move to follow them, but her voice carried across the morning air. She loved yellow roses, had them in her wedding bouquet, said they reminded her of sunshine, even on cloudy days. James quickened his pace, his thoughts spinning. The yellow roses had been Marie's private joy. She'd never even put pictures of her bouquet on social media. How could this woman know? As they walked toward Lila's school, the little girl's voice piped up, innocent and clear. "Daddy, I think that lady seems nice. Maybe Mommy did send her to watch us, like a guardian angel?" James swallowed hard, unable to find the right words to respond. How could he explain his unease to a 7-year-old who saw the world through such pure eyes. Sometimes angels look different than we expect, Lila continued, skipping along beside him. Miss Thompson at Sunday school said they could look like regular people. Baby, not everyone who knows things about Mommy is an angel, James said gently, though his own mind was racing with questions. We need to be careful around strangers, remember? But she drew us so pretty, Lila insisted. And her eyes looked sad, like yours do sometimes when you miss Mommy. James felt his chest tighten at his daughter's perceptiveness. She noticed so much more than he gave her credit for. The rest of the day passed in a blur of woodwork and worry. James threw himself into his projects at the workshop, trying to lose himself in the familiar rhythm of sanding and measuring, but Sarah's words kept echoing in his mind. That evening, after their usual dinner of mac and cheese, Lila's favorite, James tucked his daughter into bed. Her room was a comfortable mix of princess decorations and the mobile of wooden animals he'd carved for her last Christmas. Daddy, Lila asked as he pulled her butterfly-patterned comforter up to her chin, do you think we'll see the drawing lady again? I don't know, sweetheart, James answered honestly. Time for sleep now. After kissing her forehead and turning on her nightlight, James stepped into the hallway. His eyes fell on the framed photograph of Marie that hung on the wall, her bright smile beaming out from beneath her wedding veil, a bouquet of yellow roses in her hands. He reached out and touched the glass, tracing the outline of her face. What's going on, baby? He whispered to the photograph. Who is she? How does she know these things about us? The picture offered no answers, just Marie's eternal smile, frozen in that perfect moment from 8 years ago. James leaned against the wall, his mind replaying every detail of the morning's encounter. The sketches had been too accurate, too personal. And those eyes. Lila was right. There was something familiar about them, something that unsettled him deep in his soul. He thought about Sarah's worn clothes and tired face, contrasted with the gentle precision of her artwork, the way she'd spoken Marie's name with such familiarity. The small details she knew, details that hadn't been shared on social media or with casual acquaintances. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, James felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on his shoulders. He had spent the last 2 years since Marie's passing building walls around himself and Lila, keeping them safe, keeping them together. Now this mysterious woman had appeared, armed with intimate knowledge of their lives, claiming to be fulfilling his late wife's wishes. The photograph of Marie seemed to watch him as he stood there, her smile holding secrets he couldn't quite grasp. How could Sarah know about the yellow roses, about the butterfly clips, about all those private moments she'd captured in her sketches? Steam rose from the large pots of vegetable soup as James ladled portions into worn plastic bowls. The church shelter's dinner program wasn't fancy, but it offered warm meals and a safe space for those who needed it most. The familiar routine usually brought him peace, a way to honor Marie's memory by helping others, just as she always had. More carrots in this one, please, said elderly Mr. Thompson, holding out his bowl with shaking hands. James smiled and fished out extra vegetables for the man who came every Wednesday, rain or shine. The shelter's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the linoleum floor. About 30 people filled the tables, some chatting quietly, others eating in silence. The smell of fresh bread from the local bakery's donation mixed with the soup, making the drafty room feel almost cozy. Then she walked in. Sarah stood in the doorway, her thin frame nearly lost in an oversized gray coat. Her eyes met James's, and he nearly dropped the ladle. She looked smaller somehow, under the bright lights, more fragile than she had in the park. But there was something else in her expression, a quiet certainty that made his skin prickle. Evening, James, she said softly, approaching the serving line. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the way her cheekbones stood out too sharply. How did you know I'd be here? He asked, keeping his voice low so the other volunteers wouldn't hear. Marie told me. Sarah accepted a bowl of soup with trembling hands. You started volunteering here 3 months after her passing. Every Wednesday and Friday night. James felt the color drain from his face. He hadn't told anyone about those first terrible months after Marie died. when he'd throw himself into volunteer work, just to keep from drowning in grief. Sarah didn't move away from the serving table. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were arrested when you were 19. Peaceful protests gone wrong. The charges were dropped, but you lost your scholarship to Howard University." The ladle clattered against the pot. Several heads turned their way. "You don't know what you're talking about," James said, but his voice shook. "The construction company where you apprenticed," Sarah continued, her eyes never leaving his face. "The foreman, Mr. Davidson, passed you over for promotion 3 times. Said you weren't ready. But you heard him tell his buddy it was because clients wouldn't want a black man running their projects." James gripped the edge of the serving table, his knuckles turning white. Those were private wounds, ones he'd never shared with anyone except Marie. On their 3rd date, sitting in her car, he'd finally opened up about the frustration and humiliation. She'd held his hand and listened, really listened. "Stop it," he whispered fiercely, but Sarah wasn't finished. "Marie wrote you letters," she said. 7 of them. She hid them in her yellow recipe box, the one with the broken hinge. You never found them because you couldn't bear to go through her things after she was gone. The room suddenly felt too hot, too small. James stepped back from the serving table, his breath coming in short gasps. Miss Clara, another regular volunteer, touched his arm with concern. "James, are you all right, honey?" He barely heard her. The yellow recipe box. Marie had inherited it from her grandmother. It sat untouched in the top kitchen cabinet, along with other pieces of her life he couldn't bring himself to sort through. "Who are you?" he demanded, loud enough now that several people looked up from their meals. "How do you know these things?" Sarah hugged her bowl of soup closer, as if trying to absorb its warmth. "I promised her," she said simply. "I promised I'd watch over you both." The fury rose in James's chest, hot and sudden. This woman, this stranger, had been watching them, learning their secrets, invading the private corners of his grief. And now she stood here, acting like she had some right to know these things, to speak Marie's name. "James?" Miss Clara called after him, but he was already moving, pushing through the swinging kitchen doors and out into the back alley behind the church. The November air hit him like a slap. James paced the narrow alley, his breath forming clouds in the cold. Music from a distant car stereo drifted by, along with the smell of someone's dinner cooking. Normal sounds, normal smells. But nothing felt normal anymore. How could Sarah know about the arrest, about Davidson and his casual racism? Even his closest friends didn't know those stories. And the recipe box, he'd forgotten about it entirely, had pushed it to the back of the highest shelf where he wouldn't have to see it. The thought of those letters, written in Marie's flowing handwriting, waiting all this time. James leaned against the rough brick wall, closing his eyes. Part of him wanted to run back inside and shake the truth out of Sarah. Another part wanted to drive home, climb onto a chair, and reach for that recipe box right now. But the largest part of him was simply overwhelmed by the invasion of his privacy, by the resurrection of old wounds, and by the growing certainty that this strange woman knew things about his life that no stranger should know. The metal door creaked behind him, and he tensed, expecting Sarah to follow him out. But only the distant sounds of the shelter drifted through the gap. Clinking dishes, muffled conversations, the hum of the industrial dishwasher. James stayed where he was, torn between his anger at Sarah's presumption and his desperate curiosity about what else she might know. The yellow recipe box. 7 letters. What had Marie written? What other secrets was this mysterious woman holding, and how had she come to possess them? The sharp whine of the table saw filled James's workshop as he guided a piece of oak through the blade. Sawdust scattered across his steel-toed boots and work apron, but his usually steady hands felt uncertain today. The morning sun streamed through the dusty windows of his small carpentry business, highlighting the unfinished pieces of a custom dining room set. He switched off the saw and ran his fingers along the cut, frowning at its slight wobble. That wasn't like him at all. James Carter took pride in his precise work, in creating furniture that would last generations. But today, his mind kept wandering back to the shelter, to Sarah's words about things nobody else could know. "You still carry that ticket stub from the carnival," she had whispered. "The one where Marie first held your hand." James pulled the worn leather wallet from his back pocket, fingers finding the faded pink stub hidden behind his driver's license. He'd never told anyone about keeping it, not even Lila. The phone rang, startling him. "Carter Custom Furniture," he answered, trying to sound professional despite his scattered thoughts. "Mr. Carter? About the Robertson order?" His supplier's voice faded as James's eyes drifted to the family photo on his desk. Marie's smile beamed back at him, her arms wrapped around a toddler Lila at the beach. "That summer seemed so long ago now. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" James forced himself to focus on the conversation about wood deliveries and deadline changes. By late afternoon, he'd managed to complete only half his usual work. The kitchen cabinets he was refinishing sat barely touched, and he'd had to restart the dining chair legs twice. Giving up, he cleaned his tools and locked up early. He needed to pick up Lila from her after-school program anyway. The drive home was quiet, with Lila humming softly to herself in the back seat. James watched her in the rearview mirror, her small fingers tracing patterns on the window. She had Marie's creativity, always drawing or making up stories. In their modest kitchen, James heated up leftover chicken and rice. The microwave hummed while Lila set out paper napkins and plastic cups, her special job since she was 5. "Daddy?" Lila pushed her rice around with her fork. "Can we see the lady with your eyes again?" The question hit him like a physical blow. James's hand tightened around his glass. "No," he snapped, louder than he meant to. "We're not going to see her." Lila's lower lip trembled, her fork clattering against the plate. She'd never heard that tone from him before. James immediately felt his stomach twist with regret. "Baby, I'm sorry," he said, softening his voice. "I didn't mean to yell." But the damage was done. Lila ate in silence, shoulders hunched, occasionally wiping at her eyes. James tried to make conversation about school and her art class, but received only quiet nods in response. Bath time and bedtime stories passed in the same heavy quiet. As James tucked the covers around her, Lila finally spoke again, her voice small. "Did the lady make you mad, Daddy?" James sat on the edge of her bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling. "No, sweetheart. I'm not mad. I just..." He struggled to find words a 7-year-old could understand. "Sometimes grown-ups get scared too. Like when I'm scared of thunderstorms? Something like that." He kissed her forehead. "Get some sleep now." After turning on her nightlight and closing her door, James found himself pacing the kitchen. The linoleum squeaked under his feet as he moved back and forth, from sink to refrigerator, refrigerator to counter. Marie's cookie jar still sat in its place of honor, though he hadn't baked since she died. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the church shelter's number. He could call, ask about Sarah, maybe get some answers. But what if those answers put Lila at risk? What if Sarah was dangerous, despite her gentle appearance? The clock ticked loudly in the quiet house. James stopped at the window, staring out at the dark street. Tomorrow was another shelter dinner. Sarah might be there again, with more whispered secrets about his past. Or worse, about Marie. His feet carried him to the hallway, where family photos lined the walls, James and Marie on their wedding day. Baby Lila coming home from the hospital, the 3 of them at the beach. He touched each frame, remembering how Marie had insisted on printing physical copies, not just keeping them on phones. Back in the kitchen, James gripped the counter edge until his knuckles turned white. The truth about Sarah pulled at him like a tide, but his instinct to protect Lila pushed back just as strong. He'd promised Marie he'd keep their daughter safe, but he'd also promised to raise her with an open heart, to show her that love was stronger than fear. The dishwasher hummed in the background, as James paced another loop around the kitchen island. Sarah knew things, private things. But was that reason enough to trust her? Or was it exactly why he should keep his distance? He glanced at Lila's latest artwork, stuck to the fridge with alphabet magnets. It showed 3 stick figures, one tall with brown skin like his, one small with pigtails, and one with what looked like angel wings. His daughter's innocent wisdom often saw things more clearly than he did. Still, James couldn't shake the memory of Sarah's eyes. So familiar it was unsettling, or the way she seemed to see right through his carefully constructed walls. The need to understand warred with his fear of what that understanding might cost. The morning light cast long shadows across the park as James strode purposefully toward the bench where it had all started. His work boots crunched against the fallen leaves, each step heavy with determination. Sarah sat there, just as he somehow knew she would be, her weathered sketchbook balanced on her lap. She didn't look up as he approached, her pencil moving in gentle strokes across the paper. The early autumn breeze rustled through her graying hair, which was pulled back in a neat but fraying elastic band. Her coat, though clean, showed signs of wear at the edges. "We need to talk," James said, his voice firm but controlled. He remained standing, unwilling to sit beside her just yet. Sarah's hand stilled on the paper. "I've been waiting for you to come back," she said softly, finally looking up. Those eyes, the ones Lila had noticed, met his with an unsettling familiarity. "How do you know so much about me?" "About Marie?" His late wife's name felt thick in his throat. "Those things you mentioned at the shelter, nobody knows about that arrest. I was just a kid, and the records were sealed." Sarah closed her sketchbook carefully, running her palm across its worn cover. "Marie told me everything, James. We shared so many secrets back then." A sad smile touched her lips. "We were best friends once, before life took us down different paths." James felt his legs weaken slightly, and he lowered himself onto the far end of the bench. "Marie never mentioned you. Not once in all our years together." "No, she wouldn't have," Sarah replied, her voice carrying a weight of sadness. "I disappeared from her life long before you met her, but we found each other again, near the end." James's hands clenched into fists on his knees. "Near the end? You mean when she was sick?" Sarah nodded, reaching into her bag a canvas tote that had seen better days, and pulled out a bundle wrapped in faded blue cloth. "She gave me these, asked me to keep them safe until the right time came to give them to you." James stared at the bundle as Sarah carefully unwrapped it, revealing a stack of envelopes tied with a simple string. His breath caught in his throat as he recognized Marie's handwriting. "Letters?" His voice cracked slightly. "All this time, you've had letters from my wife?" "She wrote them during her last months," Sarah explained, holding the bundle but not yet offering it to him. "She had something she needed to tell you, James, something she couldn't say face to face." A cold feeling settled in James's stomach. "What are you talking about?" Sarah's fingers traced the edge of the top envelope. Marie carried a burden, a secret that weighed on her. She was afraid of how you might react, but she couldn't bear the thought of leaving this world without you knowing the truth. James stood abruptly, taking 2 steps away from the bench. "What truth? What secret?" His voice came out harder than he intended, drawing the attention of a passing jogger. "It's not my place to tell you," Sarah said quietly. "Marie's words are in these letters, but James—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What you'll learn, it might change how you see things, how you see her." He turned back to face her, his carpenter's hands trembling slightly. "Are you telling me my wife betrayed me somehow?" Sarah's expression softened with compassion. "Life isn't always simple, James. Neither are the choices we make." She held the bundle of letters out to him. "Marie loved you deeply. Never doubt that. But sometimes the people we love most are the ones we hurt without meaning to." James stared at the letters but didn't take them. His world felt like it was spinning off its axis. The park, the bench, the trees, even the morning sun seemed suddenly unfamiliar and strange. "The truth will set you free," Sarah said softly, still holding out the bundle. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and threat. James stood frozen, caught between his need to know and his fear of what that knowledge might bring. The letters waited, held in Sarah's steady hand, containing whatever secret his wife had carried to her grave, and now, somehow, brought back to life through this mysterious woman who shared his eyes. The autumn wind rustled through the trees as James sat at his kitchen table, staring into his morning coffee. Dark circles hung under his eyes from nights spent tossing and turning. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sarah's face and heard her words echoing in his mind. The truth will set you free. He'd taken different routes to work, avoided the park, and even switched his volunteer shifts at the shelter. But somehow, Sarah was always there, a quiet presence on the edges of his life. He'd spot her sketching near the grocery store, or sitting on a bench downtown, or walking past his workshop. She never approached him, but her eyes followed him with that same gentle sadness. Lila noticed too. "Daddy, why don't we go to the park anymore?" she asked one morning while getting ready for school. "Is it because of the nice drawing lady?" James just kissed her forehead and changed the subject. How could he explain something he didn't understand himself? Sunday arrived crisp and clear. James straightened Lila's dress collar as they walked up the church steps, nodding hello to familiar faces. The old wooden doors creaked as they entered the sanctuary, warm light streaming through stained glass windows. They settled into their usual pew, third row from the back, just far enough to feel comfortable but not too distant. The organ music swelled as the service began. James tried to focus on the hymns, on the scripture readings, on anything except the whispers that suddenly rippled through the congregation. He didn't need to turn around to know what caused them. Sarah had slipped in through the back doors. She wore a clean but worn dress, her gray-streaked hair neatly combed. She sat in the very last pew, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed forward. The whispers grew louder. "Isn't that the homeless woman? What's she doing here? Someone should ask her to leave." James felt eyes darting between him and Sarah. He saw the disapproving glances, the raised eyebrows, the heads bent together in hushed conversation. His shoulders tensed as he heard Mrs. Davidson, the pastor's wife, murmur to her friend, first that incident with his arrest years ago, and now associating with, well, the judgment in her tone was clear. James had faced it before. The subtle racism wrapped in polite smiles, the assumptions about him as a single black father, the way some parents hesitated to let their children play with Lila. Usually, he let it roll off his back. But today, with Sarah's presence behind him like a spotlight, each whisper felt like a needle. Lila, oblivious to the tension, swung her legs and hummed along with the hymns. When she spotted Sarah, her face lit up. She waved enthusiastically, earning more disapproving mutters from nearby congregants. "Sit still," James whispered, gently lowering her hand. Guilt gnawed at him for dampening her natural friendliness, but he couldn't handle any more attention. The sermon passed in a blur. James barely heard the pastor's words about compassion and judgment. The irony wasn't lost on him. He kept his eyes fixed forward, his back straight, feeling the weight of stairs boring into him. As the final hymn ended and people began to file out, James quickly gathered their things. "Come on, baby," he said to Lila, taking her hand. "Time to go." They moved toward the exit, navigating through clusters of chatting church members. Some fell silent as he passed. Others suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. James kept his head high, though his jaw ached from clenching it. Just before they reached the doors, Sarah appeared beside them. The nearby conversation stuttered to a halt. "James," she said softly, holding out an envelope. It was cream-colored, slightly yellowed with age, sealed with wax. "She wanted you to have this." The envelope trembled slightly in her outstretched hand. James stared at it, his heart pounding. He could feel dozens of eyes watching, waiting to see what he would do. Lila tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, what is it?" With shaking fingers, James took the envelope. The paper felt both delicate and impossibly heavy in his hands. He didn't need to ask who she was. He recognized his wife's handwriting on the front, spelling out his name in her familiar flowing script. Sarah melted away into the crowd before he could speak. Around them, the whispers started again, but James barely heard them. The envelope seemed to pulse in his grip, like a living thing, full of secrets and promises and maybe threats too. "Let's go home, sweetheart," he managed to say to Lila, his voice rougher than usual. He clutched the envelope tightly as they walked to the car, knowing that whatever was inside would change everything, but not yet ready to face what that might mean. James sat at his worn kitchen table early that morning, the sealed envelope lying before him like a ticking bomb. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a golden glow on the familiar handwriting that spelled out his name. His hands trembled as he traced the curves of the letters, recognizing the distinctive way his wife had always crossed her T's. The house was quiet, Lila still asleep upstairs. He could hear the gentle ticking of the wall clock, marking each moment he hesitated. Finally, drawing a deep breath, he carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "My dearest James," it began, and his heart clenched at the sight of her penmanship. "If you're reading this, then Sarah has found you, just as I asked her to. I know you're probably confused, maybe even angry, but please trust that everything I did was out of love." He paused, wiping moisture from his eyes with the back of his hand. The letter continued. "Sarah was there for me during my darkest times, when I couldn't burden you with my fears about leaving you and Lila too soon. She promised to watch over you both, to make sure you wouldn't close yourself off from the world after I was gone. Please, James, don't let fear keep your heart locked away. Trust her. She knows what it means to need a second chance." James had to set the letter down, his vision blurring. He got up and paced the kitchen, running his hands over his face. After a few moments, he returned to finish reading. "Remember what we always said about God working in mysterious ways? Sometimes angels come in unexpected packages. Stay open-hearted, my love. Do it for me, for Lila, but most importantly, for yourself. With eternal love, Marie." Later that afternoon, after much internal debate, James dialed the shelter's number. Sarah had left her contact information there, and within an hour he'd invited her for dinner that evening. His hands shook as he prepared the meal, his wife's favorite recipe for chicken and dumplings. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Sarah stood on the porch, wearing a clean but threadbare dress, her gray-streaked hair neatly combed. She clutched her ever-present sketchbook like a shield. "Thank you for having me," she said softly, her eyes, so eerily similar to his own, meeting his gaze with careful hope. "Daddy, she's here!" Lila came bounding down the stairs, her face lit up with joy. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around Sarah's waist. "I helped set the table." Over dinner, as Lila chatted about school and her art projects, Sarah slowly began to open up. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke of her past. "I was a kindergarten teacher," she revealed, pushing food around her plate. "Had my own classroom, my own home. Then I met someone who seemed kind at first." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "He changed, gradually. The control, the anger. It got worse until—" James noticed her hands trembling and instinctively reached across the table, stopping short of touching her. "You don't have to." "I do," she insisted gently. "You need to understand." She straightened her shoulders. "One night, I ended up in the hospital. When I got out, I had nothing left. No job, no home. He'd isolated me from everyone. Your wife, Marie, she volunteered at the women's shelter where I stayed. She saw me sketching the other women and their children. It was my way of making them feel visible again." Lila, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "Is that why you draw us? To make us visible?" Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "Your mother asked me to. She knew she was sick, and she wanted someone to see you both, to make sure you were okay." James felt his throat tighten. "All these years, I couldn't approach you at first," Sarah admitted. "I wasn't ready. I needed to heal myself. But I kept my promise to Marie. I watched from a distance, making sure you were both safe, drawing you to show her that you were surviving." The evening passed with more stories, more revelations. James found himself sharing memories of Marie, things he hadn't spoken of since her passing. Lila brought out her own drawings, proudly showing them to Sarah, who offered gentle encouragement and tips. As the night drew to a close, Lila's bedtime approaching, James noticed his daughter's eyes growing heavy. "Time for bed, sweetheart. Can Sarah tuck me in too?" Lila asked, her voice hopeful. James hesitated, then nodded, following them both upstairs. He watched from the doorway as Sarah helped Lila into bed, her movements gentle and practiced, the former teacher showing through. Lila wrapped her arms around Sarah's neck in a tight hug. "I think Mommy really sent you," she whispered, loud enough for James to hear. James felt his chest tighten with a mixture of emotions he couldn't quite name. Grief, hope, fear, and something else, something that felt dangerously like trust, all swirled together as he watched his daughter embrace this woman who had kept such a long and faithful vigil over his family. Sarah's eyes met his over Lila's shoulder, filled with understanding and patience, waiting for him to decide if he could truly open his heart again. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of May's diner as James stopped in for his usual coffee before work. The familiar smell of bacon and pancakes filled the air, but something felt different. Conversations hushed as he walked in, only to resume in hushed whispers once he passed. He slid onto his regular stool at the counter, nodding to May, who looked uncomfortable as she poured his coffee. Behind him, he could hear Mrs. Peterson and her bridge club friends, their voices carrying despite their attempts to be quiet. "Letting that homeless woman near his daughter," Mrs. Peterson was saying. "It's not right. Someone should call social services," another voice chimed in. "That poor child." James's hands tightened around his coffee mug. The hot ceramic burned his palms, but he barely noticed. He'd faced prejudice before. Being a black single father in a small southern town hadn't been easy, but this felt different, more personal. "Did you hear she was at their house?" a third voice whispered. "Right there in their home. After what happened to his wife, you'd think he'd be more careful." May cleared her throat loudly, shooting a disapproving look at the bridge club ladies. But the damage was done. James could feel eyes on his back, judgment heavy in the air. "More coffee, James?" May asked, her voice deliberately loud. Before he could answer, the bell above the door chimed. Sarah walked in, wearing a clean but worn dress, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. The whispers turned to silence. James watched as Sarah hesitated in the doorway, clearly sensing the hostile atmosphere. Her eyes met his, uncertain, ready to retreat. "Sarah?" he called out, his voice steady and clear. "Join me for breakfast?" The diner grew even quieter. Sarah walked over, her steps careful, as if crossing a minefield. James pulled out the stool next to him. "May," he said, "2 breakfast specials, please." May nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Coming right up, sugar." Mrs. Peterson's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood. "Well, I never—" she huffed, gathering her purse. Her friends followed suit, leaving cash on their table and filing out of the diner. James turned to face the remaining customers, his voice firm but calm. "Sarah has been nothing but kind to my daughter. She's helped Lila with her reading, encouraged her art, and shown more genuine care than some folks who've known us for years." He paused, meeting several gazes directly. "Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to speak to me directly instead of whispering behind my back." The diner remained silent for a moment before conversation slowly resumed, this time about safer topics like the weather and upcoming church events. Sarah stared at her hands, folded in her lap. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "Yes, I did," James replied, turning back to his coffee. "And I meant every word." May brought their breakfast plates, loaded with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. She squeezed James' shoulder as she set them down. "On the house today, both of you." The rest of breakfast passed in comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional comment about the food. James noticed Sarah ate slowly, savoring every bite, and he wondered when she'd last had a proper meal. That evening, James stood in the doorway of their living room, watching Sarah and Lila at the coffee table. Math homework was spread out between them, and Sarah was patiently explaining multiplication using colored pencils as counters. "So if you have 3 groups of 4 pencils," Sarah was saying, "how many pencils do you have altogether?" Lila's face scrunched in concentration as she counted. 12. That's exactly right, Sarah beamed, and Lila's face lit up with pride. James leaned against the doorframe, remembering the whispers from that morning. But here was Sarah, speaking to his daughter with gentle patience, celebrating each small victory. Her eyes, so similar to his own, sparkled with genuine joy at Lila's success. He watched as Lila erased and rewrote an answer, Sarah's encouraging words guiding her. There was nothing threatening here, nothing sinister. Just a woman who, despite her own hardships, had enough love left to share with a little girl who needed it. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the scene. James felt something shift inside him, like a weight being lifted. The judgmental voices from the diner seemed far away now, replaced by the sound of his daughter's laughter as Sarah drew a silly doodle next to a correctly solved problem. Maybe they're wrong about her, he thought, watching Sarah gently correct Lila's grip on her pencil. Maybe I am too. The moment stretched out, peaceful and ordinary, yet somehow profound. In the simple act of helping with homework, Sarah had created something that felt remarkably like family, something James hadn't felt since his wife passed away. Lila looked up, catching him watching them. "Daddy, Sarah showed me an easier way to do multiplication. Want to see?" He smiled, the last of his doubts fading in the face of his daughter's enthusiasm. "Show me, baby girl." The afternoon light streamed through James's living room windows, casting warm patches on the wooden floor. Sarah sat cross-legged on the couch, her worn sketchbook balanced carefully on her lap. James settled into his favorite armchair, his hands clasped tightly together, trying to hide their slight trembling. "I've been carrying this with me for years," Sarah said softly, her fingers tracing the tattered edges of the book. "It's kept me going through some dark times." She opened the sketchbook slowly, and James leaned forward despite himself. The first page showed a detailed drawing of his late wife, Marie, her smile radiant and exact as he remembered it. His breath caught in his throat. "That's from the summer fair, 5 years ago," Sarah explained, her voice gentle. "Marie was wearing that yellow sundress she loved so much." James nodded, unable to speak. He remembered that day clearly. The smell of cotton candy, Lila toddling around with sticky fingers, Marie's laugh carrying over the crowd noise. Page after page, Sarah revealed drawings that captured moments of their lives, like photographs. There was James teaching Lila to ride her bike, his protective hands hovering near the seat. Another showed him working in his workshop, bent over his latest carpentry project with intense focus. Each sketch was filled with careful details, the exact curve of Lila's pigtails, the way James's forehead creased when he concentrated, the familiar tilt of Marie's head when she was lost in thought. "How?" James finally managed to ask, his voice rough with emotion. "How did you capture all of this?" Sarah's fingers brushed over a drawing of Lila playing in the park. "Some I saw myself, from a distance. Others," she paused. "Marie described them in her letters. She had such a way with words. She could make me see exactly what she was seeing." James's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "The letters you mentioned," Sarah nodded, turning to a new page. This one showed James and Marie on their wedding day, his younger face beaming with joy. "I have more letters," she said quietly. "But James, they're not just words on paper. They're pieces of Marie's heart, her fears, her hopes." She looked up at him, her eyes steady. "I need to know you're ready to receive them fully, not just read them." James stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The late afternoon sun caught the dust motes dancing in the air. "What gives you the right?" he asked, but the anger he'd been holding on to felt weaker now. "To decide when I'm ready?" Sarah closed the sketchbook gently. "Because Marie asked me to watch over you both, not just to make sure you were safe, but to help you heal." She patted the space next to her on the couch. "Sit with me, James. Let me tell you how I met your wife. Really met her. Let me tell you why she trusted me with her deepest thoughts." James remained by the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. He could see Sarah waiting patiently behind him, her posture straight but somehow gentle, like a teacher waiting for a struggling student to find their way. "I've spent 5 years building walls," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Keeping people out, keeping myself safe." He turned to face her. "Even from Marie's memory, sometimes." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Walls can protect us," she said. "But they can also trap us. Marie knew that about you, how strong you are, but also how that strength sometimes becomes a cage." James moved slowly back to the living room, this time settling on the couch next to Sarah. He left careful space between them, but it was closer than he'd allowed himself to be to anyone besides Lila in years. "Show me more," he said, gesturing to the sketchbook. Then I'll listen to your story." Sarah opened the book again, this time to a drawing of James reading to Lila, both of them curled up in the very chair he'd just vacated. The detail was extraordinary, the way Lila's small hand clutched her stuffed rabbit, the reading glasses perched on James's nose, even the title of the book visible on its spine. "Marie used to write about these moments," Sarah said softly. "How watching you with Lila made her heart feel like it might burst with love." She turned another page, revealing a sketch of James in his workshop, teaching Lila how to sand wood. "She said you were the kind of father she'd always dreamed of for her children." James swallowed hard, feeling the familiar ache in his chest whenever he thought of Marie. But now it was mixed with something else, a warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "I think," he said slowly, "I think I'm ready to hear your story now, all of it." He met Sarah's eyes, seeing again what Lila had noticed that first day, something familiar, something that spoke of shared understanding. "I want to understand why Marie trusted you so much, why she chose you to," he gestured at the sketchbook, "to keep these memories." Sarah closed the book carefully, placing it between them like a bridge. "It's not an easy story," she warned, "and some parts might be hard for you to hear." James nodded, squaring his shoulders. "I know, but I think it's time I stopped running from the hard parts." The late afternoon sun painted the room in amber tones as Sarah settled back, preparing to share her story. James felt something shift inside him, like a door long rusted shut, finally beginning to open. The autumn days mellowed into a gentle rhythm as Sarah's presence wove naturally into James and Lila's lives. Their small house filled with new sounds and scents, the scratch of Sarah's pencil on paper as she sketched during quiet evenings, the aroma of her homemade cornbread that made Lila bounce with excitement, and the soft humming of old hymns as she helped with dishes. On Tuesday morning, Sarah stood at the kitchen counter, her silver-streaked hair pulled back neatly, spreading peanut butter on Lila's sandwich for school. "Don't forget your math homework," she reminded gently, tucking a napkin into the lunch bag. "Thanks, Miss Sarah," Lila beamed, hugging Sarah's waist before grabbing her backpack. The natural ease between them warmed James's heart, even as it stirred a complex mixture of gratitude and lingering caution. At church, Sarah threw herself into volunteer work with quiet dedication. She organized the food pantry shelves with careful precision, tutored children after Sunday school, and stayed late to help clean. Her gentle manner and skilled hands proved invaluable at the shelter, where she could often calm distraught visitors with her patient listening and understanding born from experience. "She just gets it," Martha, another volunteer, had commented while watching Sarah comfort a tearful young mother. "Some folks can sympathize, but Sarah truly knows." But not everyone viewed Sarah's integration so positively. James noticed the whispers first, hushed conversations that stopped when he approached, sidelong glances during service. Then came the pointed questions, delivered with sugary smiles that didn't reach cold eyes. "Aren't you worried about someone like her being around Lila, Mrs.?" Henderson had asked one Sunday, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her leather Bible cover. The tension finally broke open on a Wednesday evening at the monthly church council meeting. James sat in his usual spot near the back, half listening to discussions about the fall festival and building maintenance. Then Gerald Matthews, a prominent business owner, stood up. "I need to address a serious concern," Gerald announced, his voice carrying authority. "This homeless woman we've allowed to essentially live at our shelter. It's becoming inappropriate. We don't know her background, her mental state. What if she's dangerous?" Several heads nodded in agreement. James's shoulders tensed as he watched more people sit up straighter, clearly eager to join in. "Just yesterday," Patricia Wilson added, her thin face pinched with disapproval, "I saw her walking home with little Lila Carter. Alone. No offense to James, but that's simply irresponsible." The barely concealed prejudice in their words made James's blood boil. He could hear what they weren't saying, their discomfort with a homeless woman, their judgment of his choices as a black single father, their thinly veiled racism masked as concern. "She needs to go," Gerald concluded firmly. "Pastor Davis, you must see the liability here." Before Pastor Davis could respond, James stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. The room fell silent as he walked to the front, his steps measured and deliberate. "Sarah Jennings," he said clearly, looking directly at Gerald, "has shown nothing but grace, kindness, and dedication to this community. She's helped more people in the past week than some folks here have all year." His gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of those who'd been whispering behind his back. "You talk about danger? The real danger is in judging people without knowing their story, in letting fear and prejudice guide our actions instead of Christ's teaching about loving our neighbors." "Now, James," Gerald started, his face reddening. "This isn't about—" "It's exactly about that," James cut in, his voice firm but controlled. "You're not concerned about safety. You're concerned because Sarah doesn't fit your image of who belongs here, because she makes you uncomfortable, because she's different." A tense silence filled the room. Some people looked down, unable to meet his steady gaze. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Pastor Davis rose slowly from his chair, his aged face grave. He placed a weathered hand on James's shoulder and spoke quietly, but loud enough for all to hear. "If you stand with her, you'll face the storm too." The warning hung heavy in the air, but James stood straight and tall. His response was simple: "Then let it come." The kitchen glowed with morning sunlight as Sarah pulled a worn envelope from her bag. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the wooden table where James sat with his coffee. The envelope was yellowed with age, his wife's familiar handwriting stark against the faded paper. "These were meant for you," Sarah said softly, when you were ready to hear her voice again. James stared at the envelope, his coffee growing cold. His fingers traced the edge of the paper, feeling the slight ridge where the letters lay folded inside. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background, marking each moment of hesitation. "I can stay," Sarah offered, "or give you privacy, whatever you need." James swallowed hard. "Stay, please." Sarah settled into the chair across from him, her presence steady and calm. With careful movements, James opened the envelope and unfolded the first letter. His wife's handwriting flowed across the page, as familiar as her smile had been. "My dearest James, there's so much I need to tell you, things I was too afraid to say face to face. I saw how hard you worked, how you carried the weight of our family on your shoulders. I watched you push through every obstacle, every unfair judgment, every closed door. But I never told you how much it hurt to see you blame yourself for things beyond your control." James's hands shook as he read on. His wife's words spoke of her own fears, how she'd worried about leaving him alone, how she'd seen his guilt over working long hours, how she'd wanted to tell him it was all okay. "You always thought you needed to be stronger, to do more, to be more. But James, you were always enough. The way you loved me, the way you love Lila, it's pure and complete. Don't let my passing make you doubt that." Tears splashed onto the paper. James wiped them away carefully, not wanting to smear the precious words. Sarah quietly handed him a tissue, her presence grounding him as he continued reading. The second letter revealed more: his wife's regret at not having more time, her joy in watching him with Lila, her hope that he would find happiness again. "I know you, James Carter. You'll try to lock your heart away, to keep it safe. But that's not what hearts are for. They're meant to love, to risk, to grow. Promise me you won't let fear win." A sob escaped him, raw and deep. Years of contained grief broke free like a dam giving way. Sarah moved her chair closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Unlike the awkward pats and murmured platitudes he'd received at the funeral, her touch felt real, understanding. "She knew," James managed between breaths. "She knew I was drowning in guilt, and she never blamed me. Not once." Sarah squeezed his shoulder. "Because she saw you clearly, James. She saw your heart." The third letter spoke of specific memories: their first date, the night Lila was born, simple Sunday mornings with pancakes and laughter. Each memory carefully preserved in his wife's elegant script, each one a gift she'd planned for him to find. "Remember how you built Lila's cradle? You worked on it every night for weeks, getting every detail perfect. That's who you are, James. Someone who creates beauty with careful hands and endless love. Don't forget that part of yourself." James looked up at Sarah, really seeing her for the first time. She'd kept these letters safe, waiting for the right moment. She'd watched over his family from a distance, honoring his wife's trust. In her eyes, he saw not pity but deep understanding. "Thank you," he whispered, "for bringing her voice back to me." Sarah smiled softly. "She never really left. She's been in every laugh Lila shares, every kind thing you do, every moment you keep going." They sat together in comfortable silence as James read the final letter. The morning light shifted across the kitchen floor, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed. When he finished, James felt lighter, as if a weight he'd carried for years had finally lifted. "I've been so afraid," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Afraid of dishonoring her memory, afraid of changing anything, afraid of letting anyone new into our lives." Sarah's hand found his across the table. "Being afraid means you loved deeply. But love isn't meant to be a cage, James. It's meant to set us free." For the first time since his wife's passing, James felt truly understood. Sarah's presence beside him wasn't replacing what he'd lost. It was helping him remember how to live fully again. Their fingers remained intertwined on the table, neither rushing to break the connection. Later that evening, after Sarah had gone home, James sat on the edge of Lila's bed for their nightly routine. His daughter's dark eyes studied his face with that uncanny wisdom children sometimes possess. "Daddy?" she asked, hugging her stuffed giraffe close. "Yes, baby, I think Mommy's happy now." Lila reached up to touch his cheek. "You're not so sad anymore." James gathered her close, breathing in the sweet smell of her shampoo. "You know what? I think you're right." He felt the truth of it in his bones, not the absence of grief, but the presence of something new, hope, perhaps, or the courage to begin again. The autumn morning started like any other. James woke to his alarm at 6, made coffee, and prepared Lila's lunch for school. But when he walked past the church shelter on his way to drop off a donation of old blankets, something felt wrong. The usual morning bustle was replaced by hushed whispers and concerned faces. Miss Martha, the shelter's coordinator, approached him with worry etched across her weathered features. "James, honey, Sarah's gone." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" Her bed wasn't slept in last night, her few belongings. Miss Martha gestured to the small corner where Sarah usually kept her things. The familiar sketchbook and worn backpack were missing. "Everything's gone. No note, nothing." James set down the box of blankets, his hands suddenly unsteady. "Did anyone see her leave?" "No one." Miss Martha shook her head. "Tommy, the night volunteer, said she was here at dinner time, but when morning came..." She spread her hands helplessly. The next few hours passed in a blur. James called the local hospitals, checked the park bench where he'd first met her, and even drove around town searching familiar spots. No trace of Sarah anywhere. By afternoon, the whispers had already started. At the grocery store, he overheard Mrs. Peterson talking to the cashier. "Well, you know how those people are. Probably back on whatever got her homeless in the first place." James gripped his shopping basket tighter, knuckles white with tension. He wanted to defend Sarah, to tell them about her gentle spirit, her artistic soul. how she'd helped Lila with homework and brought light back into their home. But the words stuck in his throat. At the hardware store, where he picked up supplies for work, Bill Henderson caught his eye with a knowing look. "Heard about your friend disappearing. Can't say we didn't warn you, James. Some folks just can't be helped." The judgment in his voice was clear. James focused on counting screws, trying to keep his composure. "You don't know her," he managed to say. "Neither did you, apparently," Bill replied. By evening, the rumors had spread through the whole town. Sarah had stolen money from the shelter. She'd been seen buying drugs. She'd been running a scam all along. Each story more outlandish than the last, but people nodded and accepted them readily enough. At the church council meeting that night, James sat in the back row, listening as they discussed the unfortunate incident. Pastor Davis tried to be diplomatic, but others weren't so careful with their words. "We need better screening procedures," declared Mrs. Thompson, her voice sharp with self-righteousness. "We can't have dangerous individuals preying on good Christian folks." James stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Without a word, he walked out, unable to bear another minute of their sanctimonious judgment. The drive home was painful. Every street corner held a memory of Sarah, her sitting on the park bench sketching, walking Lila home from school, carrying groceries to help an elderly neighbor. How could someone who'd brought so much kindness just vanish? Lila was already asleep when he got home, thank goodness. He couldn't face explaining Sarah's disappearance to her tonight. His daughter had grown so attached, always saying Sarah had been sent by her mommy. How would she handle another loss? In the quiet kitchen, James noticed an envelope propped against the fruit bowl. His heart skipped a beat when he recognized Sarah's careful handwriting. When had she left this? He picked it up with trembling fingers, feeling its weight, literal and emotional. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence as he sat at the table, turning the envelope over and over in his hands. Part of him desperately wanted to tear it open, to find answers, explanations, anything to make sense of her disappearance. But another part of him was terrified of what he might read. What if the rumors were true? What if everything, the connection to his late wife, the drawings, the gentle wisdom, had been an elaborate lie? The thought made his chest ache. The unopened letter sat before him like a challenge. Through the window, he could see the moon hanging low and bright, the same moon that had witnessed so many evening conversations with Sarah on the porch. They'd talked about everything. His fears for Lila's future, the weight of being a single father, the struggle to keep faith in a world that seemed determined to judge them both. James pushed back from the table, leaving the letter untouched. He couldn't bring himself to read it. Not yet. Reading it would make her disappearance real, final. And despite what everyone in town was saying, despite the evidence of her abandoned belongings at the shelter, something in his heart refused to believe Sarah would just leave them without a good reason. The kitchen felt emptier than it had in months. The space where Sarah usually sat helping Lila with homework gaped like an open wound. Her coffee mug, the chipped blue one she always used, still sat in the dish rack where she'd left it yesterday morning. James rested his head in his hands, the weight of loss settling over him once again. The letter remained on the table, unopened, holding whatever truth or lies Sarah had left behind. James moved through the next few days like a sleepwalker, going through the motions of daily life. He packed Lila's lunch with the same care as always. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich cut into triangles, apple slices arranged in a star pattern, and a little note with a drawn heart. But his hands trembled slightly as he worked, and his eyes kept drifting to the empty chair where Sarah had sat helping Lila with homework just days ago. "Daddy, you forgot to put the crusts back in my sandwich," Lila said at breakfast, poking at her plate with her fork. Sarah always saved them for the birds. James swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "I'm sorry, baby. I'll remember tomorrow." The drive to school felt longer than usual. James kept glancing in his rear-view mirror, half expecting to see Sarah's familiar figure on a street corner or park bench. But she remained as gone as the morning fog that had lifted from the streets. At work, James threw himself into his carpentry, hoping the familiar rhythm of sawing and sanding would drown out his thoughts. But even here, memories of Sarah lingered. He remembered how she'd admired the intricate details of his latest project, a custom-built bookshelf, running her fingers along the carved edges with genuine appreciation. "You okay there, Carter?" his coworker Mike asked, noticing James had been staring at the same piece of wood for 10 minutes. "You seem a million miles away." "I'm fine," James answered automatically, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. That evening, Lila pushed her dinner around her plate, unusually quiet. Her normally rosy cheeks looked pale, and she hadn't touched her favorite mac and cheese. "You feeling all right, sweetheart?" James reached across the table to feel her forehead. It felt warm, too warm. "My head hurts," Lila mumbled, leaning into his touch. "And I'm cold." James's heart rate quickened. He grabbed the thermometer from the bathroom cabinet, his hands shaking slightly as he took her temperature. The digital display blinked. 102.4 degrees for the graph. "Okay, baby, let's get you some medicine and into bed," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. But as he tucked her in, Lila's skin felt hotter than before, and her breathing seemed shallow. By midnight, the fever had climbed to 103.8 degree Veneslast. Lila tossed restlessly in her princess sheets, her dark curls matted with sweat. When she started mumbling incoherently, calling for her mommy and Sarah, James's carefully maintained composure cracked. He scooped her up, wrapping her in her favorite purple blanket. "Hold on, baby. We're going to get you help." The emergency room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Lila's flushed face as James carried her through the sliding doors. "My daughter," he called out, his voice rough with fear. "She's burning up." The next hours blurred together in a parade of nurses, doctors, and tests. James paced the sterile hospital corridor, his work boots leaving scuff marks on the polished floor. Each time someone in scrubs walked past, he straightened up, hoping for news. Finally, they moved Lila to a regular room. She lay small and vulnerable in the large hospital bed, an IV dripping fluids into her arm. The doctor had mentioned something about a severe viral infection, but James could barely focus on the words. All he could see was his baby girl, looking so much like her mother had in those final days. "Please," he whispered, sinking into the chair beside her bed. "Please, not her too." Tears he'd been holding back for days finally broke free, rolling down his cheeks. In the quiet of the hospital room, broken only by the steady beep of monitors, James clasped his hands together. He hadn't prayed properly since his wife's passing, anger and grief building a wall between him and his faith. But now the words poured out, raw and desperate. "Lord, I know I've been angry. I know I've pushed you away, but please, please don't take her from me. She's all I have left." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry I didn't trust. I'm sorry I let fear rule me. Just please, please let her be okay." Tears streamed freely now as he reached for Lila's small hand, so warm with fever. The memory of Sarah's words echoed in his mind. "The truth will set you free." He'd been so focused on protecting himself from pain that he'd forgotten how to truly love, truly trust. "I should have believed in you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to God, Sarah, or his late wife. "I should have kept my heart open, like you wanted, like the letter said." Outside the hospital window, dawn was breaking over the town, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. James held on to Lila's hand, his prayers continuing in silent desperation as monitors beeped steadily in the background. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room cast harsh shadows across Lila's small form as she slept fitfully in the too-big bed. James sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her, his large carpenter's hands gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned white. The steady beep of the heart monitor marked time like a merciless clock, each sound both reassuring and terrifying. 3 nights had passed since Lila's fever had spiked so suddenly. The doctors spoke of infections and antibiotics, their words washing over James in waves he couldn't quite grasp. All he knew was that his little girl's normally bright face was now pale and drawn, her usual endless chatter replaced by weak whimpers. In the quiet of the night shift, with only the hum of medical equipment for company, Sarah's words echoed in James's mind. The truth will set you free. But what truth? And why had she disappeared just when he'd started to trust her? The unopened letter she'd left behind felt like it was burning a hole in his jacket pocket where he'd carried it these past days, unable to bring himself to read it. A nurse padded in softly to check Lila's vitals, offering James a sympathetic smile. You should try to get some rest, Mr. Carter. There's a cot we can bring in. James shook his head. I'm fine, thank you. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sarah's face, heard her gentle voice reading stories to Lila, remembered the way she'd looked at him with such understanding, as if she could see straight through to his soul. The night stretched endlessly. James found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, praying. Not the formal prayers of Sunday service, but raw, desperate whispers into the darkness. Please, he begged. Not my baby girl. And God. Where are you in all of this? Morning light was just beginning to creep through the window blinds when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Pastor Davis stood there, his kind face etched with concern, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, the pastor said quietly, offering one of the cups to James. The rich aroma of real coffee, not the watered-down hospital variety, filled the room. Thank you, James murmured, accepting the cup with trembling hands. How did you know we were here? Word travels fast in our little community. Pastor Davis pulled up another chair, his movements careful not to disturb Lila's sleep. And I've been worried about you, son. Both of you. James took a long sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through his tired body. I keep thinking, if Sarah were here. Ah. Pastor Davis nodded slowly. Sarah's disappearance has hit you hard, hasn't it? I trusted her, James said, his voice rough with emotion. For the first time since Marie died, I let someone in. And now, he gestured helplessly at Lila. Everything's falling apart again. The pastor was quiet for a moment, watching Lila's chest rise and fall with each breath. You know, James, faith isn't about having all the answers. Sometimes, it's about trusting even when the path ahead is dark. But how can I trust when everyone I let close either leaves or… James couldn't finish the sentence, thinking of his late wife. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Pastor Davis said softly. Sometimes the biggest tests of faith come right before the greatest blessings. He nodded toward James's jacket pocket, where the outline of Sarah's letter was visible. Maybe it's time to stop running from whatever truth that letter holds. James pulled out the envelope, its edges worn from being carried so long. His name was written on the front in his wife's familiar handwriting, Marie's last words to him, preserved all these years by Sarah. I'm scared, James admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Perfect love casts out fear, Pastor Davis quoted gently. Your wife loved you perfectly, James. Trust in that love now. With shaking fingers, James broke the seal of the envelope. The paper inside was creased and yellowed with age, but Marie's words were still clear and strong. My dearest James, if you're reading this, then Sarah has kept her promise to watch over you and Lila until the time was right. I know you're probably angry and confused about why I never told you about her, about our friendship, about the secrets we shared. But I needed someone I could trust to deliver this message when you were ready to hear it. You see, my love, I knew my time was short, even before the doctors confirmed it. And my greatest fear wasn't dying. It was leaving you alone, weighted down by grief and guilt, afraid to open your heart again. You've always carried the world on your shoulders, trying to be strong for everyone else. But strength isn't about carrying burdens alone. It's about having the courage to let others help you carry them. Sarah knows your heart because I told her everything about you, your goodness, your struggles, your dreams. I chose her to be my messenger because she understands pain and healing, loss and hope. She knows what it means to rebuild from ashes. So here is my final request, my last gift to you. Don't shut out love when it comes again. It may not look like you expect, but it will be my gift to you. James lowered the letter, tears streaming down his face. Pastor Davis rested a comforting hand on his shoulder, saying nothing, simply being present in this sacred moment of grief and revelation. From the bed came a small, weak voice. "Daddy, are you crying?" James quickly wiped his eyes and leaned forward to stroke Lila's forehead. Her skin felt cooler than before. "I'm okay, baby girl. Just reading something from Mommy." "What did she say?" Lila asked, her eyes clearer than they'd been in days. James looked at the letter in his hands, then at his daughter's trusting face, and finally understood what his wife had been trying to tell him all along. "She said that love comes in unexpected ways," he answered softly, "and that we have to be brave enough to recognize it when it does." James stepped into the stark hospital hallway, his muscles aching from another night in that unforgiving chair. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. He needed coffee, anything to keep him going after these sleepless nights watching over Lila. That's when he saw her. Sarah sat in a wheelchair near the nurse's station, her familiar sketchbook balanced on her lap. She looked smaller somehow, frailer, dressed in a pale blue hospital gown that made her skin appear almost translucent. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, but they were still unmistakably like his own, the same eyes that had first caught Lila's attention in the park that autumn morning. James stopped dead in his tracks. His coffee cup slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor, dark liquid spreading across the tiles like spilled ink. "Sarah?" His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. She looked up, her hands trembling slightly as they closed the sketchbook. "James," she said softly, her voice weak but steady, "I heard about Lila. I had to come." A nurse rushed over with paper towels for the spilled coffee, but James barely noticed. His mind raced with questions, emotions churning like a storm relief, anger, confusion, hope, all fighting for dominance. "Where?" He had to clear his throat to continue. "Where did you go?" Sarah's fingers played with the corner of her sketchbook, a nervous habit he'd noticed during their shared dinners that now felt like a lifetime ago. "I collapsed at the shelter," she explained, her words coming slowly, carefully. "My blood pressure was dangerously low. Malnutrition, they said. Years of not taking proper care of myself finally caught up with me." James found himself moving closer, drawn by some force he couldn't name. A young doctor passed between them, breaking their eye contact momentarily, and James used that second to gather his thoughts. "You could have called, left a message, anything." The words came out harder than he intended, weighted with the worry of the past days. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "They took my phone when I came in standard procedure with emergency admissions. I was barely conscious those first days, and when I finally came to..." She paused, drawing a shaky breath. "I was ashamed. I'd promised to be there for you and Lila, just like I promised your wife. Instead, I ended up being another person who disappeared from your lives." A nurse walked by, pushing an elderly patient in a wheelchair, and James moved closer to Sarah to let them pass. He found himself kneeling beside her wheelchair, his anger melting like morning frost under the Sunday. "I looked for you," he admitted. "Every morning at that park bench, every night at the shelter. When Lila got sick," his voice caught. "I needed you there." Sarah reached out hesitantly, her thin fingers touching his hand. Her skin felt cool against his. "I heard about Lila yesterday, when I was finally allowed my phone back. I practically begged the doctors to let me come to this floor." She gave a weak smile. "They only agreed if I used the wheelchair. Hospital policy for patients who've had fainting episodes." James looked down at their hands, his dark and strong from years of carpentry work, hers pale and delicate but somehow just as resilient. He thought about all the sketches those hands had drawn, all the years she'd kept her promise to watch over them from afar. "I'm sorry, James," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with sincerity. James felt the last of his anger seep away, replaced by a profound relief that made his shoulders sag. "You came back," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. "That's all that matters now." Sarah's fingers tightened around his, and for a moment they sat in silence, surrounded by the quiet morning bustle of the hospital. A monitor beeped in a distant room, Nurses chatted softly at their station, and somewhere down the hall, a TV played the morning news at low volume. Through the window, James could see the sun continuing its climb into the morning sky, painting the sterile hospital corridor in warm hues of gold. In that light, despite her pallor and the dark circles under her eyes, Sarah looked stronger than she had moments before, as if his forgiveness had somehow helped heal something in her too. They stayed that way for a long moment, connected by linked hands, and shared worry for the little girl sleeping in the room behind them. Two people who had started as strangers, brought together by loss and love, now finding strength in each other's presence once again. The steady beep of hospital monitors filled the small room where Lila slept peacefully, her fever finally breaking. Afternoon sunlight filtered through thin curtains, casting gentle shadows across her face. Sarah sat in a worn vinyl chair beside the bed, holding a colorful storybook in her lap. Her voice was soft but clear as she read, bringing the characters to life with subtle changes in tone. James watched from the doorway, his heart warming at the sight. Over the past 2 days, Sarah hadn't left Leela's side except when nurses came for checkups. She'd shown up with a bag full of books, some borrowed from the children's section of the library, others purchased from the hospital gift shop with what little money she had. And then the brave little bird found her way home, Sarah read, carefully turning the page. Lila stirred slightly, a small smile playing on her lips, even in sleep. She always loved that one, James said quietly, stepping into the room. Marie used to read it to her. Sarah looked up, her eyes gentle. I remember. Marie mentioned it in one of her letters, how Lila would ask for it 3 times in a row before bed. James settled into the chair on the other side of the bed. The tension that had gripped him since Sarah's disappearance had begun to ease, replaced by something softer, more uncertain. I'm sorry I doubted you, he said after a moment. When you disappeared, I thought, you thought I'd run away, or worse. Sarah closed the book, running her fingers along its worn spine. I don't blame you, James. Trust isn't easy for either of us. No, it's not. He watched Lila's chest rise and fall with steady breaths. The doctors say she can probably go home tomorrow. That's wonderful news. Sarah's face lit up, then grew hesitant. I should probably stay, James said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. If you want to, I mean. Lila would love it, and I. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I think we need to talk. Really talk. Sarah nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. I'd like that. They moved to the small sitting area near the window, leaving Lila's bedside for the first time in hours. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the linoleum floor, and somewhere down the hall, a cart squeaked past. I've been scared my whole life, Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. Scared of my ex-husband finding me, scared of letting anyone close, scared of failing Marie's last request. She met James's eyes, but being scared didn't stop me from keeping my promise to her. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Why didn't you tell me sooner? About knowing Marie? About the letters? Would you have believed me? Sarah's smile was sad. A homeless woman claiming to know your late wife's deepest thoughts. I needed you to see me as a person first, not just my circumstances. You're right, James admitted. I wouldn't have listened. I was too wrapped up in my own pain, my own fears. He glanced at Lila. But she saw right through all that, didn't she? She has your eyes, she said that first day. Sarah laughed softly. Children see truth where adults see complications. Lila has Marie's spirit, that ability to look past surfaces to what matters. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the hospital sounds fading into the background. James thought about all the walls he'd built around his heart since Marie's death, how carefully he'd guarded himself and Lila from the world's judgment and pain. When you disappeared, he said finally, it wasn't just about trust, it was about loss. Again. And I realized something. I'd started to depend on you being there, not just for Lila, but for me too. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in her lap. I've been alone so long, depending on anyone terrifies me. But these past weeks with you and Lila, she took a deep breath. It feels like coming home, and that scares me even more. Because good things don't last? James asked gently. Because they can be taken away, Sarah's voice cracked. Just like my teaching career, my home, my dignity, all gone because I trusted the wrong person. James reached across the space between them, hesitating for just a moment before taking her hand. Her fingers were cool against his palm. Maybe we're both too used to bracing for the worst. Maybe that's what Marie was trying to tell us in those letters, that fear shouldn't win. Sarah's fingers tightened around his. She was always wiser than both of us. Daddy? Lila's sleepy voice called from the bed. Is Sarah still here? I'm right here, sweetheart, Sarah answered, but she didn't let go of James's hand as they moved back to Lila's bedside. Good, Lila mumbled, already drifting back to sleep. Don't go away again. James felt Sarah's hand tremble in his, saw the tears she quickly blinked away. He understood then, they were all afraid of the same thing, losing this fragile, unexpected connection that had begun with a child's simple observation about eyes that looked alike. The night settled around them, hospital lights dimming for evening hours. Sarah picked up another book, but didn't open it. Instead, she spoke softly about her dreams of teaching again someday, of having a classroom where every child felt safe and seen. James shared his own hopes, expanding his carpentry business, maybe starting a program to teach trade skills to people trying to rebuild their lives. As they talked, the walls between them continued to crumble, replaced by something stronger, understanding, trust, maybe even the beginnings of healing. James squeezed Sarah's hand, feeling the steady warmth of her grip in return. For the first time since Marie's death, the weight of solitude lifted from his shoulders. He wasn't alone anymore. None of them were. The old wooden pews of First Baptist Church creaked with the weight of curious onlookers. James Carter stood at the front of the sanctuary, his work-worn hands gripping the podium. The late afternoon sun streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the gathered faces, some friendly, others still skeptical. Pastor Davis sat in the front row, offering an encouraging nod. Sarah occupied the seat beside him, wearing a modest blue dress borrowed from the church clothing drive. Her hands fidgeted with her sketchbook, but her eyes remained steady on James. Thank you all for coming today, James began, his deep voice carrying to the back rows. Most of you know me as the quiet carpenter who fixes your cabinets and builds your bookshelves. But today, I need to speak up about something important. He paused, scanning the crowd. Mrs. Thompson from the quilting circle was there, along with Mr. Rodriguez, who ran the hardware store. Even some of his harshest critics had shown up, like Betty Wilson, who'd once suggested Sarah was a danger to the community. A few months ago, I thought I knew everything about protecting my daughter and keeping our lives safe. Then God sent someone to challenge everything I believed. James gestured toward Sarah. Through her, I learned that sometimes the people we're quickest to judge are the ones who need us most, and who might end up helping us more than we help them. James pulled out his carpenter's measuring tape, letting it extend across the podium. Every day, I measure twice and cut once. That's good carpentry. But I realized I wasn't applying the same care when measuring people's worth. A murmur rippled through the congregation. James continued, his voice growing stronger. That's why I'm proposing we start the Grace Haven Project. Using my skills and whatever help you're willing to offer, we can build transitional housing for homeless women trying to rebuild their lives. He unrolled architectural sketches across a table, showing simple but dignified small homes. These units would give women a safe place to stay while they get back on their feet. We'll offer job training, counseling, and most importantly, community. The room buzzed with whispered conversations. James held up his hand. Before you decide, I'd like Sarah to share her story. Some of you have judged her without knowing her journey. I did too, at first. Sarah rose slowly, clutching her sketchbook. Her voice trembled at first, but gained strength as she spoke. 10 years ago, I was a teacher with a home and a future. Then I married the wrong man. She opened her sketchbook, showing a self-portrait from happier days. After 2 years of abuse, I ran with nothing but the clothes on my back. She turned the page to darker sketches, shadows and sharp angles depicting fear and loneliness. I lost everything: my job, my home, my dignity. But the hardest part wasn't being homeless. It was becoming invisible. People looked through me, not at me. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she stood straighter. What saved me wasn't just shelter or food. It was someone finally seeing me as a person again. James and Lila did that. This church did that. She showed recent sketches of smiling faces from the congregation, detailed drawings capturing moments of kindness. Mrs. Thompson dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Even Betty Wilson's stern expression had softened. There are more women like me, Sarah continued. They're not just statistics. They're teachers, nurses, mothers, women who need a chance to start over. With this project, we can offer that chance. James stepped forward again. I've already purchased land near the church with my savings. I can donate my labor, but we'll need materials, volunteers, and support. He squared his shoulders. I know it's asking a lot, but I believe this community has an even bigger heart than I imagined. The silence that followed felt heavy with possibility. Then Mr. Rodriguez stood up. I can offer supplies at cost from my store. His voice cracked. My own mother. She could have used a place like this. Mrs. Thompson raised her hand next. The quilting circle will make bedding for every unit, and will teach any residents who want to learn. More hands shot up. The church treasurer offered to set up a dedicated fund. A local nurse volunteered medical screenings. The high school shop teacher promised to organize student volunteers for basic construction work. Betty Wilson stood slowly, her face flushed. I was wrong about some things. My spare room could house someone while we build. She looked directly at Sarah. I'm sorry for how I treated you. Pastor Davis rose, beaming. I believe we're witnessing God's love in action today. Let's make it official. All in favor of supporting the Grace Haven Project, say aye. The response thundered through the sanctuary. Aye. James felt tears threatening but blinked them back. Sarah's eyes met his, shining with joy and gratitude. Around them, people were already forming committees, making plans, offering resources. The same community that had once whispered in judgment now buzzed with enthusiasm for change. Mr. Rodriguez was examining the blueprints, suggesting improvements. Mrs. Thompson had her phone out, texting other quilting circle members. Even the children were getting excited, with several Sunday school classes volunteering to decorate the future homes. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows through the stained glass. But inside the church, light seemed to glow from the faces of people united in purpose, their hearts open to possibility. What had started as one man's proposal had transformed into a community's mission. The spring breeze carried the sweet scent of flowering dogwoods across the church grounds. Sunlight sparkled off the fresh white paint of the newly constructed women's shelter wing, its presence a testament to what love and determination could build. A cheerful banner stretched between two columns read, Grand Opening, Hope House, a place of new beginnings. James Carter stood near the entrance, adjusting his navy tie. The past 6 months had transformed not just the church property, but the entire community. Where there had once been whispers and judgment, there was now understanding and support. Local businesses had donated materials, volunteers had worked weekends, and even Betty Wilson, once their strongest critic, had organized a furniture drive. Sarah stood a few feet away, greeting arriving guests with quiet grace. She wore a yellow sundress that made her look younger, more carefree. Her sketchbook was tucked under her arm, a habit she'd never lost. But now those sketches helped tell stories of hope to other women seeking refuge, showing them that change was possible. Lila skipped between clusters of people, her white ribbons bouncing against dark curls. She'd insisted on wearing her special dress, the one with tiny purple flowers that Sarah had helped her pick out. Every few minutes, she'd run back to James or Sarah, sharing her observations about the decorations or the growing crowd with childlike enthusiasm. Look how many people came, Daddy. She tugged at James's sleeve, pointing to the parking lot where cars still rolled in. Even Mrs. Thompson brought her famous lemon squares. James chuckled, smoothing Lila's ribbons. That's because people want to help, Sweet Pea. They understand now what we've known all along. Everyone deserves a chance at a fresh start. Pastor Davis approached with a broad smile, his Bible tucked under one arm. James, the contractor just gave final approval. We're ready whenever you want to begin the ceremony. James nodded, feeling a familiar tightness in his throat. This moment represented so much more than just a new building. It was about second chances, about seeing beyond appearances, about love breaking down walls of prejudice and fear. "Sarah," he called softly. She turned from her conversation, and even now, months later, he caught his breath at the warmth in her expression. "It's time." She joined them at the entrance, where a small podium had been set up. The crowd naturally gathered around, their faces expectant. James saw his own journey reflected in their eyes, how they'd moved from suspicion to acceptance, from judgment to compassion. "Before we cut this ribbon," James began, his voice steady and sure, "I want to thank everyone who helped make this dream possible. 6 months ago, I stood in our sanctuary with an idea that seemed impossible. But you all proved that when we open our hearts, miracles happen." Sarah stepped forward, her voice gentle but clear. "Hope House isn't just a shelter, it's a promise to every woman who walks through these doors that she matters, that her story deserves to be heard, that she has value beyond her circumstances." The crowd murmured in agreement. Several women who'd already been helped by their temporary shelter program stood nearby, their eyes shining with tears of recognition. Lila, who'd been unusually quiet during the speeches, suddenly moved to stand between James and Sarah. She reached up and took Sarah's hand, her small fingers intertwining with longer ones. The gesture drew smiles from the onlookers. They'd all witnessed how the little girl had helped bridge the gap between Sarah and the community. Looking up at her father with those big, honest eyes that could see straight to the heart of things, Lila spoke with innocent certainty. "Daddy, she really does have your eyes. Maybe that means she's family now." The simple truth of a child's observation hung in the air. James felt tears welling up as he looked between his daughter and the woman who'd changed their lives. He saw it now, not just the physical similarity Lila had noticed that first day in the park, but something deeper, a shared understanding, a matching spirit of compassion and resilience. Without hesitation, James pulled them both close, one arm around each. His tears fell freely now, but his smile shone brighter than the spring sun overhead. Everything he'd feared losing, stability, trust, love, had been restored and multiplied through this unexpected journey. The crowd burst into applause, but James barely heard them. In this moment, holding his daughter and Sarah, he felt complete. The future stretched before them, like the clear blue sky above, boundless, bright, and full of promise. Where grief and fear had once clouded his vision, now he saw only hope, love, and the beautiful truth of redemption. Sarah squeezed his hand, her own eyes glistening. Lila beamed up at them both, secure in the knowledge that children often grasp before adults, that family isn't always about matching names or shared history, but about hearts that recognize each other and choose to belong together. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of James Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.